Intro. The system and where you stand in it. Parasite is a movie about poverty and how the system puts you down. The system that isn't made for you and already has a chokehold on you, basically. Even though Parasite is a film made in and takes place in South Korea, the things it knows about the system are still on display and are still relatable to over here in the US and some other places as well. That's because the idea of the system is universal. It doesn't matter where you are, there is a system. There are cogs in the wheel. There is a hierarchy in some way or another. That's the interesting part about the system that is important to realize, and that it relies on others being above others in certain aspects of life, and that, inequality is just bound to happen, which shouldn't be the case at all, because in a true perfect system, there wouldn't be distances between real people and like the billionaires and the rich people above them. But before we get into the depth of in the things in the system, we should first know about the story of Parasite, like the actual movie story. We see the Kim family, who consists of Ki Tak, Chung Suk, Ki Jung, and Ki Woo, living in poverty. They're in Seoul, which is the capital of South Korea. And so they have to pay more because, you gotta get that city life. Now, Mi Hyuk gives a scholar's stone to them, saying, "You will be rich," which is a good way to get somebody's hopes up. He also gives the advice to lie, just straight up lie on a resume for a job. He works as an English tutor at a wealthy person's home for their daughter, and so he wants Ki-woo to replace him while he's away. Ki-woo does that, and lies, as you do, saying he goes to Yonsei, which is a top university in South Korea, and gets hired as the English tutor after his first lesson, probably because of that. So now he's getting more money for the family at least. Ki-woo then sees an opening as an art therapist for Ki Jung to take. And that works because the Park's son has trauma. And so, what could it be? You could probably draw it out. This is because of a ghost Da Sung saw one day in the kitchen. To make sure the Kim family can get more money, you gotta maximize that money. Ki Jung says that the chauffeur of the Parks had something, let's put it as intimate, in their car. They had intimate affairs. This causes Ki Tak to coincidentally, become the new driver. But wait, Chung Suk is not in the house yet. They don't have a job. Why don't we just get rid of the housemaid? Perfect plan. So that's what they do. And it works. It's called lying. Oh no, the housemaid has tuberculosis. Then she's out, she's gone. Now, when the Parks are away, everyone in the Kim family is acting all rich and all that stuff, but just wait a minute, the housemaid is back. Why? She goes into a secret room that the Parks don't even know about, where her husband, Gyun Se, hides from loan sharks. But the housemaid begs Chung Suk to let her husband stay, but the Kims all reveal themselves. So the housemaid now had blackmail on them. But guess what? The Parks are on their way home from their trip early because of the rain. As you know, that's just how the weather is. So the housemaid is thrown into the basement because, that's just how that works. That's how the system works. But the Kim family's place gets drowned in water from the rain, so they have to go to the school with the rest of the brokey people living in the slums. But who cares? Because the next day, there's a fun little party. Ki-woo goes downstairs to try to kill Gyun-se with the sorcerer's stone, basically, but gets knocked out by him instead. Then Gyun-se stabs Ki Jung in front of everyone, ruining the party. He then gets stabbed by Chung-suk, but then the Parks see their son passed out from the fear of the ghost he saw, just coincidentally named Gyun-se. They say to Ki-tak as he helps his daughter that their son needs to go to the hospital. And this enrages Ki-tak enough that he just kind of stabs Father Park and then runs off. Then we cut to the aftermath of everything and what happens to everyone right after this bloody incident. Ki-woo survives his bludgeoning, but his sister doesn't. Him and his mom are convicted of fraud, but his dad's a wanted fugitive. Just how that works. But Ki-woo spies on the Parks house, but under a new family, and is able to see the Morse code system that his dad has been sending from the bunker of the house. Ki-woo writes a letter saying he will one day be able to buy the Parks house. Then that's it. Roll the credits for the movie. That's the whole thing. Now, when we talk about the system, we need to know what the system is, because it's a very broad term. It covers a lot of things, and people use it a lot to talk about a lot of different things. Because in your life, you've probably heard the term the system at some point. The system is the societal pressures and the way that society around you works and functions in every aspect. The term system usually is just used to describe how everyone's life has been systemized and it has its way of working, in quotes. It's also the system in which people at the top, basically the rich people, the big people, stay richer and richer while not really helping the middle class at all. It's really built on the idea of this hierarchy, which, is a big part of that said system. The hierarchy is a thing in the system and in society as a whole that plays a part in everyone's lives because of what it is based on. It's based on various things like race, class, gender, sexuality, everything you could think of, the whole shebang. These are all the things that people are kind of put down in society for over time. And a lot of them, and it's getting to the point where it's going to be all of these, you can't control. You can't control what race you are, yet a lot of people are put down for being a certain race. You can't control your sexuality, same thing as the race one. You get the idea. But the only thing that people used to be able to control, but are slowly kind of losing the ability to, is their class. It's the wealth inequality that has kind of killed the middle class from growing over time. It's that hierarchy at work that does the magic. But the middle class has not really grown at all recently. And we can talk about that since that's important. It has changed over the decades since the old days that other people had. The people at the top had a different world than what people have now. This is because of a lot of things. The governments acted differently back then, and the middle class flourished for a long time. For this long period of time, there was a different system under place where a small batch of shareholders weren't at the top, at the hierarchy, and it was the majority of people who, had the say. The system of old and the ones that a lot of people who are older, usually older, grew up under was this one that said companies paid employees first and then the money fizzled out until it got to the shareholders. It sounds like a foreign idea compared to now because you would never, ever hear about anything like that in the modern day. Now, the system has changed to where these shareholders, these small batches of people who literally only own shares in a company, just a big portion of it, have more importance than the people who actually do the labor. That's not really fair in any society or any way you put it. This is because of the Friedman Doctrine, which, wow, what a thing to write. Which basically says that since the shareholders are the owners of the business, they obviously deserve the profits of the company. For what? That's a good question because I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you because it doesn't exist. There's no reason that makes sense for that. This is also because apparently to the Friedman Doctrine, a company doesn't have any responsibilities for anything other than its shareholders, which, that's a really interesting philosophy. Because why? It's because of how they have to raise profits for them to get more money, and then you gotta buy more stocks. It's a cycle. This is how you get what we in the business call short-term profits, long-term stagnation. Because of how you will make decisions that will lead to profits immediately, but they won't stay for too long. Let's take a look at how employees are treated under a similar doctrine which was used during the Gilded Age before the New Deal became a thing. There was this court case in the Michigan Supreme Court that said Henry Ford had to put shareholders first. This shareholders first mentality is still held up to this day, but when you look at what happened to the company, Ford paid the shareholders, and a few of them went off. They left the company to make the Dodge company, which is now a competitor. And this led to the Ford company, to lose money overall compared to what it could have had. Now, you might be wondering why these shareholders were mad. They were so mad that they sued Henry Ford in the first place. Why were they so mad? It's because Henry Ford wanted to pay the employees of the company more and more and offer more benefits so that more people would want to work there. In theory, this would have worked better for the company because the people who needed work would have gone to the Ford company, and that would have made other car companies not really worth it. But that long-term success was instead given for short-term profits, which were used against Henry Ford later on. But in a monopolistic sense, which is what every business in their, Fish's business as well, is after nowadays, this would have been better for a company to make sure they sold more models, but long-term success isn't right now. All that matters is the right now. Companies and the people at the top don't care about the employees because they've been told they really don't have to. They only have to worry about people who own the company, which doesn't include employees because they don't own high enough stake in it. They're just brokies, I guess. Wow, no guys, I'm not going to care about you. They line the pockets of the very few, aka the people who don't do the work and the people who are exterior shareholders and just use the interior shareholders kind of really like pawns in a way. Now, let's look at the Kims and the Parks and how they differ, but also are the same in some ways. They're the same in one very important way, and that is they are both products of the system. The system made both of them the way they are and the lifestyles they both live. The Kims live in poverty in a basement flat. They do not have a lot to their name. It would basically be a miracle to have anything to their name at the point that they're at. This is the worst case scenario for anyone, and anyone could be in, and they're not guaranteed anything because of that system. We see throughout the movie that their home is also very unsustainable because of the weather or whatever may happen to their house. The rain that causes the Parks to come home early basically also destroyed their house. And that's because it's in the basement and below ground. So the windows are right there on the ground level, which is sadly probably the only option for them because of their financial position being in like the lower half, if not the lower quarter. If you look at the ground as where people should be, then the Kims are below that in a metaphorical way, and literally in a literal way as well, because they're in a basement. Now, if we step across the aisle and look at the Parks, who is this rich and flamboyant family, who is very rich, and they kind of show it. They show it in their house and a lot of the aspects of their life. We see their rich house, obviously. It's so big, it has a hidden bunker that no family really knows about. Not even them. That's when you know you have a big house. It goes to show how big their home is. It's very open, and it's full of all these luxurious goods that you can see when you walk in. It's very in your face with how rich it is. You can also see what they have through how they act. They act like everyone is below them if they're poorer than them. It's the sense of entitlement that kind of finds its way under most of like the rich people in society. It isn't all rich people. It's just really the greedy ones. They wear the preppy clothes and just leave a lot of the work to do for the housemaid of the house, which is usually what happens for things like that. Like, if you ever went to the movie theater and see somebody really make a janitor earn his pay, let's describe it as that. It's this sense of my needs are more important mentality. And this is seen as in the murder scene when Ki-tak is looking at Ki-jung, who is injured, literally injured, possibly like about to die. And he looks, and this usually should be something where somebody, anyone, is allowed to grieve and try to help their daughter, because, you know, that's their daughter. But even if it wasn't, that's somebody who's dying. But it's not. It's not that, because Father Park needs Da Sung to go to the hospital. This is because he thinks his needs are important, and he has that privilege to have his family be put first compared to everyone else around him, including his workers, which shows the ideals that he lives by where there is a hierarchy. The surplus of wealth and the luxuries that need to be bought because they just can. They can buy those things that they want. They can do all the things they want to do. They aren't struggling to survive because of their class and because of their way of living. Their luxuries and stuff had made them basically distant from anyone who is poor. A brokey, to put it into their terms. It's the people below them. And so the Parks are very disillusioned by the idea of being poor, or not having all the luxuries and all the privileges that they have, that they forget about. Because they forget about them being human. And that's why he doesn't really have any empathy when he asks that question. Empathy goes away when you work your way to the top, because you realize you don't need it. When you need to do anything you can to get to the top, and I mean anything, you tend to leave behind empathy and some other emotions that usually make you human and what separate you from AI. Those are for the weaklings who need to put other people equal to them, which makes them less money. When you have $2, but you need to give $2 to somebody else and yourself, you yourself only have $1. So why share it? That's the mentality that people who have to get to the top have, because it's about what they themselves need to do to keep that money. The parks, in this case, have the mentality of they are more important, and that $1 bill would instead be both children go to the hospital and but that would take more time. It's just the fact that their son isn't put first, and that sense of boss over workers mentality. Because Ki Jung and Ki Tak are both seen as workers by the parks, it gives off this sense of entitlement to the parks, and especially Father Park, that they are below them because they work for them. They don't have a life outside of it, basically. They have to do whatever he wants them to do. This is also how the stereotypical boss acts, in a sense, even outside of the work, just because of that mentality. When you give people a sense of power, most people are going to exercise that power until they just can't anymore. That's just most people's nature. That's just natural. Of course, it's not everyone who would do that, but it's the natural force that most people can't get over, it seems like. There are a lot of people who don't use all the power they're given, and they decide to use their power for good. But the system really doesn't promote them as much compared to the people who do and then get ahead in life. It promotes the people who are like Father and Mother Park, where they exploit people and they don't have empathy for people. Instead, they were just doing anything to get on the top of that ladder. They were just trying to climb it without really any regard to other people. The parks are the result of what happens when you forget where you started and you only remember where you're at. You live in the moment, but you don't really remember the past. And it's the mentality of the rich, and it's an accurate way to show the idea of what rich people are kind of like when you reach the top. The nothingness, the void that forms in a way, an oligarch structure. The things that the people don't really see too often in public. The Kims represent the forgotten, the ordinary people of Korea and everywhere the system applies to, that neglected people like them in favor of people like the Parks, who have more wealth, they have more privilege, they have basically more everything. They're like this idea that most people feel like has happened with them because in their government, especially in their government, the idea that they have been left out of the circle of people that laws really care about, the people who used to have been cared for in the past, and now they really aren't cared for as much, the people who have to fend for every last thing they have before they fear it gets taken away from them. In a system where nothing is guaranteed, what people have left is more important to them than trying to gain ground. Because what they have is already more than what they're guaranteed. Now, with a lot of depression in the system and a lot of neglect, there is a huge majority of people who want change. They want to see the system be for them again instead of the small circle of the people who have wealth, who have all that stuff. For change to actually happen, the system would need to be changed from the innermost parts of what causes it to be like that. So for that, we can look at the idea of lobbying. Lobbying, for those who don't know, is when the big people and the big corporations spend money to buy votes in Congress or any government that allows it so that the laws can go the way they kind of want to. It's a double-edged sword because it goes both ways, but it's also a weed whacker to show the weak people in the government who can be bought out. A system where people's votes can be bought is not really a free democracy, like a liberating democracy. No matter how you look at it, no matter the perspective, it just shows that people can be bought, and that works against people as well as people lining up their paychecks. People shouldn't be worth a dollar amount in the things that are supposed to help the entirety of the country. Or even in ethics. You shouldn't be able to buy your ethics. Now, according to the Supreme Court or whatever, this is freedom to use money or whatever. But that shouldn't be able to apply with special, interest. It's a system that allows people at the top, the small circle of people who have everything, to buy their way into a system without really being elected. It's the unfair way that politics is bought with the most amount of money and is influenced in all these different ways, which you can kind of question the ethics about that a lot. But it also comes from the idea of generosity that some people think the small circle has. Billionaires and the people at the very top of the ladder don't really have empathy like we think normal people do. They do some good stuff because that's what makes good press. You can't be against the top 1%ers if they're doing the occasional good thing. So instead, you can just manipulate the press and seem in touch. Then you're doing a good thing. In today's news cycle, you probably could, but it doesn't stay for long because of how the news works now. Move on from one thing to the next thing, which is also why these issues don't really get a lot of attention. The news sources, when you look at who owns them, are owned by the full circle. The rich people all seem to own it in a way, or not own, they have a big stake in it if they don't own it. In some of the most popular news stations and newspapers, this information stream and how companies are owned is usually regulated by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, but it seems like those parts of things aren't really caring for the common folk anymore. It's about corporate interest, which in and of itself is kind of a special interest. The people in charge who allow these things aren't in charge to order what's right. They're in charge to be in charge, basically. Power is something that people at the top are hungry for, and that needs to stop. The idea that people can just have power should just kind of stop. But power is something that can be manipulated in the getting. People will lie and say, no, I'm not like the other guy, or whatever they say now in debates. They say what they think the people want to hear and not really what they mean. But lying in politics is always common. That's the whole stereotype around it. The thing you'll hear online is vote for this party, or no, vote for this party. That doesn't work. It doesn't. It's partisan, it's gridlock, it's everything. And it gets nothing done in the long term if you base your vote just on one party. People in the parties don't vote. They don't even consistently vote along party lines, by the way. So there's just a lie there. Oh, I'm going to vote for this party because they're going to do that. They don't really vote like that anymore. Some of them don't. A lie that party is all that matters. Vote based on what they support and what the records say. That's what you should be voting on. That's the thing that matters most was anything like that, because especially was people. They were like, oh, I'm going to vote against party lines 17 times. Okay, bro. You're not even part of the party at that point. You're just in charge to be in charge. But this begs the question of what to do. Since every election doesn't have a guarantee of having a candidate that will try to fix the system, but instead enhance on it or try and do nothing, we need actual solutions to problems, because people need solutions instead of slogans. That's the whole thing. That's the whole politics thing, I guess. First off, we need the idea of an economic floor, not a safety net. A safety net is not the same as an economic floor, because for most things in the safety net, you have to be in a situation like the Kims, or you have to be old and retired. There's barely any that aren't that. A floor allows people to walk and not have the ability to fall, because why should somebody fall in order to rise again? And how in this system will that work when people get stuck in a lower position because of things around them? When I've talked to friends about the idea of a floor versus a net, some people have brought up that you can get caught in a net and it's hard to get out of that net sometimes. Which is true, because you need things to survive, but you shouldn't be in a place to really rely on it so much to be like, whoa. Like, if it's the majority of your stuff, you're clearly not in a good position because of the system. So what does an economic floor mean? It really means that there should be rights and privileges given to everyone equally that will not allow them to fall into desperate situations. Desperation causes fear, and there should be no fear in the richest country, or any country that, really wants to care for its citizens like that. These should be things like a right to an income, a right to a job, a right to healthcare, and the list of necessities go on. We shouldn't have anybody end up like the Kim family does, because that's not freedom. That's literally not freedom. You're not liberated if you're in that situation. It's just gilded gold. Like a universal basic income system that would make sure people have an income and can afford goods is the first step. If over 50% of your monthly paychecks are going to rent, you're at the most danger of falling further down. There's nothing you can do about that, because they're just going to raise the pricing. That's how apartments are. It's an expensive thing to fund, but there's many ways to do it. So there's no need to go into all of those different things. But a basic income section would actually see them have money to spend. They could do stuff and feel like they're living life and not just being alive. Because the thing is, there's money at the top, and then there's not enough money for the middle class. It's divided in a way that would make it seem unfair, and the people who are the most populous group have nothing, when they should have more. It's about looking at what to do to fix all the sinking boats. There's a saying that is described sometimes in politics or whatever that says, a rising tide lifts all boats. That would be a good sense for the economic floor. Everyone can walk on an economic floor. The basic income that people would get is something that would actually be able to lift them and let them buy their house, buy a new car if they wanted it, and all that. Not luxuries, but let them buy the stuff they need. Because why is, an apartment, or even a house, why is a house a luxury now? Now, the second thing that needs to be talked about is healthcare. Healthcare is always the big discussion every 4 years, but healthcare is not guaranteed. And it's a pretty progressive position, in quotes, to want some form of universal healthcare. But it's better for hospitals and the consumer if they have a basic form of healthcare overall. Picture this. You go to the hospital for some pain in your stomach, let's say. You don't know what it is, but you feel like you're gonna die. You're uninsured, and so when you see wherever you're going, you're gonna see that bill, that iconic bill, and you're gonna get it. It's really expensive because hospitals just need that money. What are you more likely to do if you just can't? Just pay it and go into bankruptcy? Or you could just not pay it, which is stupid to do, so you shouldn't do that. But the hospital loses money on it, but you're not in bankruptcy. Now, a hospital visit, right? That's a common occurrence. Shouldn't that be free? It's covered by insurance, but again, it's not guaranteed. If people are able to actually go and see their doctors for something as simple as their physical or yearly checkup, it would be cheaper. Because then these health companies, which should not be for profit, by the way, these companies are a scam. It's a scam on the consumer. These health companies would have less to worry about and could do their job instead of scamming people out of what they pay for. But the last thing that was mentioned, but also not mentioned, was jobs and transportation. People are starting to need jobs because of corporate profit margins, and so people need to do something. But also people are, guess what? Not guaranteed any public transportation. Trains, buses are only common in some places in the US, but if you want to go on a long trip, you have to go to private corporations that can and do vary in prices. Also, these trips from these buses are kind of limited and inconsistent compared to public transportation and the systems like that. It supplies what the city's infrastructure doesn't do, and it gives less jobs since it's only buses mainly. This is why train tracks should be laid out more and infrastructure projects are popular. Because they give jobs. We should have jobs to have trains so all these bad drivers can get off the roads. That's why having that floor is at least guaranteeing it long range is important, because you can walk everywhere in the world, but that would take a while and a longer time than driving or using a train or bus or any public form of transportation. This and the idea of having income-based housing, like social housing, would be enough to lift all the boats that the tide should lift. But there needs to be more of an effort for it. There needs to be less people in the capital, like the Hunger Games basically, controlling everything. With things like solar panels and ending the subscription services in places where you can. The idea of private property and things that people own would be back instead of owning nothing and just renting everything forever, because it doesn't feel like you own anything. You're paying a subscription to temporarily get it. It's important that people have something to their name and not just things other people own. Having a Netflix subscription is not the same as owning a cool little trinket you found somewhere, because you don't own the Netflix subscription. The CEO does, because they own the company. And the shareholders do too. So the idea of bringing back private property is returning things to the people, and is the best way that we can change the system. Always be informed when voting, when looking for a better option to the system, if that's something you're after. But in the end, change is possible. You just have to look in the right spot, and people have to know about it in order for it to actually happen. When you look at or listen to the music for the movie, it gives off the vibe that it's a horror thriller movie, which it is technically, but the way it uses strings and such is in a way that makes the parks, the rich people, seem scary. It's antagonizing them because of the difference in class, and now we see them through the Kim's family's perspective. It's horror when walking up to the house as well, because you don't know what rich people are going to be up to. You just don't. You just know what their lifestyle is like, or you can assume, and what they were like on the outside, not on the inside. It's to make sure the idea of the Kims and the Parks interacting is something that is unsettling, something that feels weird through the music, because in this context, it is weird. They don't interact at all. It's an interesting thing to hear throughout the movie, but also the fact that they have a scary sound throughout the whole movie, even when it isn't scary, is something that shows the atmosphere of the entire movie, because of how the sounds make the scenes and can help make sure there's a certain feeling of uncertainty and uneasiness with them. Now, for the numbers, the movie was rated very high. On IMDb, it has an 8.5 out of 10, which puts it at the 34th highest rated movie on the website. On Metacritic, it got a 97, which basically tethering on the A+ range. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 99%, and which is so close to 100%, but not quite. But on Letterboxd, it has a 4.5 out of 5, which puts it as the 14th highest rated movie on there. But the reviews overall have been good, which is good since the movie was able to be the first non-English speaking movie to win Best Picture. It's also a good movie to watch in its original language, as that's how I watched it, and it was pretty good because I can handle subtitles like that. Overall, Parasite is a movie that is good at showing that there is change that needs to happen in society overall. There are changes that are needed, and the dichotomy between the Kims and the Parks is one that actually reflects that of current wealth division. It's something that needs to be talked about more in the current news system, but it really isn't. There are many solutions, but there are also things that have to be talked about because you can't present a problem and not have a solution to it. That's how nothing gets done. That's just how that works. But the movie is able to show that a problem is there and bring awareness to it. It would just be up to the people and the people in charge to do something about the problem. But I liked the movie. I would personally give it a 9.8 out of 10, which is high. But it's below Oppenheimer. But I also put it above the 2025 Superman movie. If you disagree or have you thought, you can leave a comment down below and share them. But that's about it. Please like and subscribe. Pretty please.